Okay, wonderful. So I'm Jenn McNamara, and I'm here today to talk to you about client-centered game design. A little bit about my background. I'm with BreakAway Games. We are a serious game development company. We do also make some commercial entertainment games. For the gamers in the room, we are largely a real-time strategy game company. We made games like Command & Conquer, Kane's Wrath, Battle for Middle-earth, Rise of the Witch King, Civilization 3, Emperor, Cleopatra, Waterloo back in the day. Early on, we did a lot of early sports games like NBC Monday Night Football, ABC Monday Night Football. I just called out the wrong 3 letters. Sorry about that, guys. Disney bought them anyway, whatever. But that was sort of where we came from. And since 1998, when the company started, we've been doing serious games. The Army War College was actually our very first serious customer. And we created the integrated gaming system and did a lot of work for them and really did a lot of DoD work early on. And health games, games for health, have been sort of one of our core areas of focus. I'm not here today to tell you much more about BreakAway games and the games that we develop, the way we create them, and the rest. This talk is really intended to share with you a lot of experiences about what it means to create games that are driven by client needs. So I'm going to make sure my hair is not hitting that thing. Okay. So what I mean by that is a lot of serious games and a lot of games that some of you even talked about are commercial off the shelf or a game that you're passionate about that you go out and you create and build and bring to market. That's not what we do. We are a partner in developing games, and we do develop them for clients. And there's a lot of things that you have to learn if you're going to be working with a client. So what I'm going to talk about today is a lot of what happens when you work with clients in a serious game development effort. Okay? So this talk actually really came from some of my experiences. There's a competition called the Serious Game Showcase and Challenge. It's a nonprofit competition that I'm a director of. There's actually a couple of IPT members here in the room today, and actually a couple of our prior winners are here in the room today as well. It's a nonprofit learning game competition. Serious Play here, there's the International Serious Play Awards as well. The Games for Change Conference has their own awards. And what I've noticed is that these client-centered games, these client-developed games, don't tend to fare as well in these competitions as the ones that people who are passionate about making a game to solve a problem tend to fare. And someone said to me, why is that? And it's like, well, there's a lot of reasons, and I have a lot of answers for it. But I hope that part of this talk today will help you to understand why that is. But one of the things that I want you to remember is all of those games are incredibly successful for the organizations that need them, and they help to serve the end users that are using them. Okay? So my focus for this talk is really driven around my experiences. So as I said, we build custom serious games for clients, for applications ranging from training to assessment, for research support, even marketing. And really, I want to emphasize that games can be used for so many things. So people often say, you know, what's your product? Well, we do all sorts of stuff, right? So for training, it could be that people want to have an external motivator to get people engaged in their training, and that's sort of more of a gamification type of approach, or more intrinsic motivation to get them involved with serious games. Sometimes people just want to get repeated practice and get people spending more time with content. You know, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So we need to provide environments where people can practice enough that they can actually perfect their practice. In some cases, we just need a record of behavior. Right? There's a lot of compliance training out there. There's a lot of legal reasons why we need to show that people have experienced something, simulated something. And that's a really good place where we can use games and game-based simulations. Sometimes we just want a more authentic context to mirror real-world performances and performance environments. Sometimes we're trying to get a better sense of organizational loyalty. A lot of people are now finding that organizations that use games in their employee training programs, a lot of the employees are actually being more loyal to those companies. So different generations are actually liking some of these approaches. So when we talk about client-centered design, what does that mean? In my background, I actually used to work for an organization called User Interface Engineering. This is just a little tiny design firm out of North Andover, Massachusetts. And my background is a combination of cognitive experimental psychology, adult education, and business. And I describe myself as sort of a human performance junkie, but everything I've always done has always been technology facilitated. So all of my early research was on artificial intelligence systems. I heard people over here mentioning AI and using that. But I was always focused on how AI could improve the way that people work. So when I was working at user interface engineering, I was really heavily exposed to human-computer interaction, interface design, and was really focused on complex web page design at the time. We're talking well over 20 years ago. I got to work with people like Jared Spool at UIE, Jacob Nielsen, Donald Norman, really some of the early pioneers of really good client-centered, user-centered design principles. And lately, these terms have really started coming back. I'm seeing, all sorts of seminars given on them across industries. We attend a lot of conferences, and they've really become hot again. So it seems really timely that this talk is here for you today. But this model wasn't really focused on games. Now, if you're interested in the concept, there's tons of models that you can look at that are talking about user-centered design or client-centered design, but basically, they all boil down to one core concept: really explicit, extensive, qualitative research up front, right? You spend a lot of time in a qualitative research phase. You really survey your end users. You get to know your end users, you elicit their needs, and you use those to drive everything that you're going to do as you develop your product. Then you proceed forward with some sort of iterative testing or iterative development process through concept, development, iteration, and delivery, right? We can talk about all sorts of design models. We can talk about agile. We could talk about anything you want. But at the end of the day, all of these models really do have a lot of analysis up front. After these early waves, there was this whole emphasis on e-learning and learning development, and they had their own models that they were using to put clients at the center. But one of the things that I found is that they all lacked a client focus that looked at the constraints of the environment. So after I was at User Interface Engineering, I got to work for another little company. It was a small defense contractor called Kai Systems Engineering. Here I was a cognitive engineer. I promise this is going somewhere, guys. And I was funded by the Office of Naval Research to study the Navy's transition to advanced distributed learning technologies. And under that funding, they actually had 4 years for me to go out and ethnographically, which is just a fancy anthropology word, to go out and live with people and study what it was like for them to use really advanced learning technologies in the field. And what we found was really good training that other people, I didn't build any of this training, but really good training that other people had built was failing all over the place. And it wasn't failing because the training was bad. It was failing because they hadn't looked at how it was going to be employed, the organizational impacts, how it was going to fit into the workload, how it was going to fit into the daily schedule. They counted if people had computers, but they didn't count how those computers were being used or how people perceived the time people spent on those computers. They didn't look at how higher commanders viewed the time spent on those computers. So at the end of the day, we saw a bunch of training programs that weren't being properly adopted and employed. So with all of this background, when I shifted into game development, and I've been with BreakAway since 2006, I really wanted to ensure that when we build our products, we really start from looking at the client constraints. So what I'm going to share with you from here on out is a series of client stories. These are all very successful programs. I will keep them as anonymous as possible. I'm going to share the missteps, though. So I'm really here to share all of the failures I've made since I've been at BreakAway. I hope you don't leave this and talk about that girl who's been a failure her whole career. So please, these have been successful programs. All of these customers know I talk about these projects, and they're very proud of these programs. Many of them are award-winning. So these are really good programs, and these are really great customers, and I have great relationships with them. So my goal is not to say, like, these are horrible people or these are horrible customers. They're great relationships. Okay, we all make mistakes, and the way we learn is to share them with one another. So again, successful programs, small missteps, and I'm going to share some of them with you today. So a couple of things. Client-centered, what does it mean? Well, I'm going to first start with a couple things it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean the client drives design. It doesn't mean the client makes design decisions, and it doesn't mean the client's always right, okay? So one of the problems we have is that often when you are teamed with a client, we have a responsibility. We have an ethical responsibility. We bring a game designer who is a, really, you're learning all about this in your program now, right? But these people study game design. They know so much about games and how to bring the power of games to your end needs, how to make them work for you. And every single person in the world has an idea, a dream, a passion for what they want to do to change their program, to change the world. But game designers have actually studied it. They study human psychology, they study learning, they study the way games work, they study play, they study the way people think, and they bring all of that to bear in their game design. They study how to make that happen for you. So one of the things that we often see is that when the client's holding the money in the purse strings, at the end of the day, they may just want to strip out a lot of the good game design and just say, okay, that's fine, I hear what you're saying, but we're going to do it my way. And that's okay, and sometimes that just happens. So one of the reasons why client-centered games may not always be as awesome as some of those other pure games that are built without the client is because the game designer has pure control, right? So let's talk about some of the tools that game designers have at their disposal. How many people in this room play games? Okay. What kind of games do you play? Just shout some out. Solitaire, okay.
Beat Saber.
Okay, Beat Saber. That's a fun one. Civilization, okay, great.
World of Warcraft.
World of Warcraft.
Breath of the Wild.
Breath of the Wild. Minecraft.
Pictionary.
Oh, World of Tanks. Pictionary, very good. What was that? Never Alone. All right, so we've got some physical games, some board games, some digital games, so all sorts of different types of games represented, right? Which is great. So often in different audiences, different people have a perception of what games are based upon either their favorite genre of game, the games they play, sometimes the games their children play. So I always like to remind people that different people play different types of games, different people like different styles of games. There are an unlimited numbers of different types of gameplay, different types of mechanics, different genres of games, different styles of games. From what I heard going around the room, this is probably familiar to most people in the room. But I'm going to get you a little bit active here. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do today is play a game. So everybody familiar with rock, paper, scissors? Anyone never play rock, paper, scissors? All right, so get to know a buddy near you. And the first thing I want you to do is play rock, paper, scissors. Rules are 1, 2, 3, shoot on 4, best 2 out of 3 wins. All right. No, we're good. Okay. All right, so has everybody established a winner? Or decided it was a draw? Okay, now, how many of you have ever played rock, paper, scissors, Spock, lizard? Rock, paper, scissors, Spock, lizard. Yes. Anybody ever played it before? Okay, so the rules of it are here on the board. It's exactly like what you just played, but now we're adding Spock and lizard. Spock and lizard.
How do you position your hand for lizard?
Lizard is like this. And this is Spock. Yes, that's lizard. That's Spock. Okay. Same rules, 1, 2, 3, shoot on 4. Best 2 out of 3 wins. You can play with the same partner. All right, go ahead and play. Okay. Now I need everybody to stand up. And if you're holding anything, put it down because you're going to move around. Put it somewhere safe. All right. We're going to go back to traditional rock, paper, scissors. In this game, 1, 2, 3, throw on 4. The loser is going to become the cheerleader for the winner. And then you go find another winner and you challenge them until there is only one winner in the room. Okay, go. Just play until you win and then go. What? 1 is fine. We have a winner still.
Go, Darren, go. You will fall to Darren's wrath. All right, Darren, give me the Darren. 4. Oh! He got you. All right, so who is it? Is it
Anybody else? The champ.
All right, come on, Darren. Darren's gonna win. Go, Darren.
All right. Okay. So, who liked the first version, traditional rock, paper, scissors, the most? Okay. Who liked the second version the most? And who liked the last version the most? All right, let's talk about why. Why did people who liked the first version the most? Okay, what did you like about it?
I know the rules, I understand them. I don't have to really think through.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's easy. You didn't have to think about it. You knew the rules. Okay, who liked the second version the most?
I like the added complexity.
You added the added complexity did something for you. Okay.
I thought it was more fun.
Okay.
Because it's silly.
It was silly. Mm-hmm.
And it came from Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, there you go. They actually did not create it. It existed before them, and they did use it on the show, though. You are correct. And that should be cited on my slide. That's the reference that's missing. Who liked the third version? And why did you like the third version? Collaborative, social? You got to play after you lose?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's actually, this is a warm-up game that we play in improv.
Okay.
As a way to, like, help boost the emotional levels.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool.
I was competitive, so
So the third version was more competitive to you? Okay.
Well, you could also participate in competition even if you yourself had lost. So, I mean, you had a champion, you following them.
So you still felt engaged even if you weren't the active player? Okay. So why would I make you do this in a class like this? Nope. I had to take out content to do it, so trust me, it wasn't that. Go ahead.
It's picking which one would be most appropriate to the client based on the needs of the client.
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple reasons. That's one of them, right? So different clients have different needs. But also, you need to know your client, right? Because if my client was this woman here in green, whose name I forget, I'm sorry, Paula. If Paula was my client and I designed the first rock, paper, scissors game to her, she wouldn't have enjoyed it as much or been as interested as if I had designed the second game. And if Monica was my client and I gave her the second game, she was probably going to be frustrated. Because those rules, I saw the look on her face, she was irritated with me. She's like, why is she making me play this stupid game, right? She wasn't happy. And that's okay. That was part of the point, was to make you feel that, right? And some people like those more expanded rules. Some people don't like that in traditional rock, paper, scissors, it's too easy for it to be a tie. There's not enough dynamics, so they tie too often. So those extra two elements, that's the complexity that you brought in. So some people like that added element. Sometimes it's too hard to remember. Wait, am I beating you? Am I not beating you? How many of you, when you played the second version, didn't use any of the extra mechanics so you didn't have to remember them? Right? Go ahead. Very good. We're going to get there, yes. Absolutely. You're a couple steps ahead of me, but that's perfect. Okay, so keep all of that in mind. All right, so we're going to talk about some design issues now. So exploring game elements. So all of those things we just talked about are game elements, right? So all of these next things that I'm going to talk about are places where either we didn't rely upon the expertise of the game designer to guide analysis and design, where we didn't test interest in game elements early enough in the analysis phase, where we didn't think through the design phase, or we allowed the client, quote unquote, to speak for the user instead of testing our assumptions, designs, and concepts with our ultimate user. And I think that's where you're coming out with, are you talking about the learner? Because the client can often be the person with the money or someone at a high level in the organization, and that person doesn't necessarily represent your ultimate end user. Okay? So I'm going to share a couple of examples here. So here's a case where we had a research physician who approached us who was doing some fellowship research. And what she believed she needed was the most immersive assessment environment possible. She wanted a full 3D navigable hospital, full hospital, so that she could test physicians' understanding of trauma referral behaviors. And she had a very small budget and a very limited time frame to build this. And she had a large number of cases that needed to be represented. And as I heard her talking about her challenges, she had been failing using paper-based cases previously. And failing is a horrible word. But she couldn't capture the information she needed. She needed to replicate real-world decision-making, and she was unable to do so with paper cases. So she said, I just need it to be as realistic as possible. So to her, realistic as possible mapped to virtual 3D environment fidelity, right? And as I heard her talk about the demands, I said, you know, we can do this with a 2D environment. We can fit your budget. We can fit your need. We can make it that we don't have to train those physicians to navigate an environment and do all of those things. And she actually got statistically significant results that a simple 2D game with a picture representing a patient that forced decision making, that actually gave them a decision-making, a cognitively rich environment. I'm working on 2 hours of sleep, guys. I apologize. My flights were very delayed last night, so my words are not as cognitively rich today as they should be. But it really worked for her. So this is a case where if we had just taken the client spec, which was written into the contract, we would have delivered a product that would have failed. So that's where listening to a game designer and letting that step in really helped to deliver what she needed. Here's one where we had an existing game up in the top corner there that had been created for a previous client. A client that we've been working with for years saw it and said, this is a solution to a problem I have. I have a whole bunch of things where we need people to learn to associate, subject matter. This is an occupational therapy client. We just need them to associate lots of different things with different pots of information. Your little matching game is perfect. We've got 50 topics. Let's just dump them into that engine and let them match away, match away, match away. It's perfect. They're going to love it. We're going to release it fast. We'll get it out into the field. And we did that, and it tanked. And we couldn't figure out why until we went out in the field, and we found out that this was not a population that was used to thinking quickly. So when we originally built that game up top, it was built for salespeople who had to think quickly on their feet about matching what they were hearing someone say with a feature. This occupational therapy group, when they meet a client, they go back to their office and they think about interventions for the client. And they think really creatively, and they're brilliant about the solutions, but they don't do it quickly on the fly like that. They actually get to think about it. So the time pressure wasn't necessary for them. They also didn't like the light carnival theme because they think about their job very seriously. So we transitioned and still gave them a matching game, set it in a library, took the time element away, and that worked for them. It's nowhere near as gamey. You and I as game players would consider it quite boring. They're stimulated as anything, right? So this is where you need to know that end user, not listen to management, not look at that, not listen to a game designer who says, well, time pressure is necessary to make this game any fun. You need to listen to a serious game designer who will actually analyze your end users and actually hear what they need and want. Another one from that same client. We worked with a representative set of users, occupational therapy group, largely female population. We worked with a couple of subject matter experts who happened to skew to the male side. So we originally came up with this really cool design for creating orthotics, which have to be molded and bent and manipulated. So we had this idea of a spell book where they would use the spell book and they would learn all the different things they had to do to properly form an orthotic, and they could fight these wizards. And if they did it properly, they would gain points and they could defeat the dragon as this powerful wizard. And they loved the spell book. They loved being able to, actually do the intense depth of work. But the wizard thing just went when we user tested it. Now, this was all discovered in user testing, so it wasn't really a horrible negative. But what we found was they wanted to tie it more closely to occupation and restoring occupation. So we just made these little characters lighter, happier, that had occupations that they needed to get back to. So we had a town that was in decay. And if you could restore the occupations of each of these characters, you could help to rebuild the town. So as each of the characters gets back to work, the town comes back to life. Same exact, we just kept the book. Doesn't make as much sense, quite honestly, thematically, but it worked for them, so we went with it. But again, this is knowing those end learners, not allowing management or a couple of end users to speak for them, but getting a large enough sample of your true end users involved. here, we often say in game design that if you want something to appeal to everyone, use aliens, animals, or some other types of shapes or things of that sort, something that doesn't have a human form. It gets you away from all sorts of things. So we took the alien route here. We had actually a much more serious reason for doing it here. We were teaching evidence-based research skills. So we wanted to teach people how to consume research and then use it in practice. We didn't want them to rely upon their medical knowledge. So we had to create these alien populations that had things wrong with them that they could research, so we could learn if they knew how to actually properly consume research, determine if studies were strong, if they had been done properly or not. And we had a lot of concerns that they may or may not accept these alien characters, that they may find this challenge too hard, it might be a little bit far. It turned out that they were completely accepting of the alien characters, but they did not like any gaming fantasy elements on top of it. So they were fine with the narrative of the aliens, they were fine with the made-up diseases and all of these things. They didn't like any fantasy sounds, they didn't like any fantasy animation, so they wanted all of that sort of stripped away. So all of the things that we thought sort of contributed to it in the user testing needed to be sort of stripped away and taken away. So talk about some different requirements issues that we've encountered along the way. And these are all going to come from one sales training game customer, just for the ease of simplicity. Every single one of these I've seen across multiple clients, but this just helps to tell the story. So we had this sales training game, and it had an extensive end user deployment analysis done, an extensive organizational analysis. This is a client that sells business to business. So they make the lenses for eyeglasses that are sold basically everywhere that you can buy eyeglasses. And they're sold under basically every brand. So their whole way of making money is for everywhere you buy glasses to sell their lenses over the other lenses. So what they've learned is that if they can better educate the high school educated person selling you your lenses for your glasses about the features of their lenses over the other lenses, you'll sell more of their lenses, thus your store will buy more of their lenses, and they'll make a better profit. So their goal is to have you be the best educated you can be about their lenses. They also happen to have the best lenses for your eyes, so all of you out there wearing lenses shouldn't feel bad about this. Hopefully you're getting really good lenses. I learned a lot about them, and I'll never wear anything else again. So first thing that they had a requirement for was that all of the games had to launch from, play within, and send data back to their learning management system. Really standard request. I will share that this is a client from almost 10 years ago, so at the time it was new and different. But we still get this request, and we still actually have the same challenge today. So it hasn't really gotten much more sophisticated. So what we found was, we said, yep, we can do that. We've been working with defense for years. We've passed data all over the place. We can send it in any format you want, no problem. So we set up for it. What we didn't realize was that their learning management system was managed by an outside vendor. And nowhere in the contract for that other outside vendor had they told them they needed to work with us. And that outside vendor's LMS was never set up to accept any of the data that they wanted it to take from us. So they didn't just want simple completion data, they wanted more sophisticated data tracking. So they paid us to build a game that had all this more sophisticated tracking that they had nowhere to put. And then they had to delay launching our product because they had to renegotiate with that other vendor who was a much larger company, so they had a much larger cycle of negotiation. So one of the rules here is to make sure that if you're working with someone, if they've never done a deployment like this, make sure that on that LMS side, they're prepared to work with you. So we now sign into all of our contracts that, within the first 2 weeks, we need that point of contact, whether it's internal or external, and we need to make sure that that connection's been made. Still on the data side. So not just from an LMS data passing side, but they wanted reports. So not only did they want reports for their own training staff to see, but they wanted reports for each of those stores to be able to see how their people were performing and how it was translating to sales. No problem, we can pull all that data, we've got it there. they didn't have the ability, after we created all of the reports, for their people to view it, because the way that their logins were being managed through another external vendor provider. So you sort of get this. Yep. You sort of get the way this type of thing is set up. They're not supporting those types of outside providers. And then finally, they wanted it to be provided as an app. Apps still to this day are a very interesting thing for us. We have no problem building games as apps. We release entertainment games as apps. We release serious games as apps. Large companies don't all understand what it means to put an app out. So if you want a game, an app out in the App Store, that means it's in the App Store. And lots of companies, when their legal departments or when their larger corporate entities start to hear they're going to have an app in an App Store, they lose their minds, right? Because they don't, or DoD, or other groups, or some of the agencies that I heard here, they're not prepared to have something out there in an App Store. So one of the first things we ask about is, are you going to have an App Store implementation model? Are you going to download things? Are we going to do it as just a strict, using a browser on a tablet? Are we going to go down to a phone? How are you going to host these things? All of those things need to be worked out in advance. And we can support all of that, but ultimately, because it's the client's content, their corporate structure needs to be on board with putting it into those environments. Okay. Artificial constraints are another big issue that we run into. Often people come along and it's the first time they've ever built a game. So they'll say, okay, well, we just want to build a quick prototype, so we're going to do it real fast. We'll do it, a small budget to do a quick prototype and test it out. Or we're going to do it in just a month or a quick 2 months or something like that. And it's like, okay, do you have a real reason to do this quickly, or are you just doing it because you want to test it? And often it's sort of an artificial constraint because they just want to prove to someone that they can do it. We've had, someone's wife got sick and ended up in the hospital. We had someone else who had signed up for an adoption, and they found out literally the day after a contract that a baby was available. That was a great thing, but it seriously delayed the timeline, and they had an artificial constraint. So it looked like they ended up failing when ultimately there was no reason to have this really sort of short timeline put into place. So I always like to suggest to people that timelines and budgets really don't try to just make them as short as possible, because working together between client and developer, if you want a short timeline, that means your timelines are short too. So if you give me 2 weeks to build something and you want it delivered in a month, that means when I give it to you for review, you've got to turn it around in like 2 or 3 days, because then I need to do another development cycle. So if you're not there in that 2 to 3 day window because you just went out to pick up a baby, or someone's in the hospital or something like that's going on, your timeline just got delayed and it looks like your project has failed. And it's fine if you've got a launch or if you've got something that's a real world reason for needing a short timeline, but don't give yourself artificial constraints to test out or try these projects. So a couple of just little quick stories that I shared with you, and here are the recommendations and lessons learned that come out of those. Costs of change grow as you go through a project. So you should really try to get to your real end user by as early as possible in a project. So that is the real learner, the real user, whatever your target is, right? Don't allow your client to speak for everything. There's a couple of tests that people use to try to sort of figure out what types of gameplay and style people like. There's a real simple one that doesn't give real robust information, which is the Bartle player types test. Sometimes I use it just to get a sense of the types of play people like. It's literally just a number of questions. It was really targeting MMOs. It's incredibly flawed, but sometimes it's just fun to use to get people talking about the types of play they like. I don't suggest using it as a valid instrument. There's the race motivation Protofile, which is much more robust. It's statistically valid. There are papers written about it. It's done tons of research behind it. If you're looking for mostly a gamification approach, this is a really nice profile that you can use. However, what we really do the most of is paper prototyping. So rather than doing a lot of analysis like that, we actually show people lots of games. We get them talking about games. We do little exercises like the little rock, paper, scissors thing we did here with you today, and we talk about what people like and don't like. We have them play digital games that we have. And then we get these paper prototypes in front of them quickly. If something doesn't work on paper, it doesn't work digitally. If something isn't interesting, if it doesn't capture what you were trying to do on paper, it doesn't do that when you spend all the money to make it digitally. If it isn't fun on paper, if people don't understand it on paper, they don't suddenly understand it digitally. So one of the things that as a client-based developer, we have to get people used to understanding is, you come to us because you want something really sexy, but along the path, the artifacts you see are not very sexy, right? They look like this. And that is very off-putting to people because they're like, wait, I just sold my organization on a reasonably sized budget, and they're thinking they're going to get this, game, and they're used to these AAA games that are out there, and the first thing they're going to see is going to look like this. And I'm like, yeah, but if we give you this, we save you hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, work with us on things like paper prototypes, and then we go through concept art and design. But trust me that this is a very good path. Control your data. If you want data output, that's great. We can give you all the data in the world. It's better if we talk about how we can process that data and parse that data and provide that data in meaningful ways. Our researchers are our biggest offenders of this. They're like, oh, just give it all to me and we'll parse it and we'll figure out what to do with it. It's like, no, games track everything. You do not want just an output of everything going on in the game. Like, talk to me about what you're trying to analyze and let us actually help to make that XML meaningful, right? Or whatever other format you want. Again, the timeline and scope, they really have to be in line with your needs and expectations. And if it's possible, when you are on the client side, or if you're working with a client, try to get them to understand that if they can be transparent about the reasons behind their budgets and their timelines, you can work with them to help them understand what you can and can't do. There's always been this sort of concept of, here's what I want, just tell me how much it's going to cost and how much time it'll take. I can meet a need at almost any budget and almost any timeline, but it's going to be a different end product. So if I have a better transparency level and we know more the targets we're working towards, we can work together to manage an end product for you, right? So broaden that analysis, look at your funding, look at your timelines, look at your IT infrastructure, your support contractors, your data needs, the data usage, your end player attitudes, whoever they are, towards games, towards specific game elements. Client-centered does not always mean the client's right. Let your game designer's expertise drive your recommendations for genre and specific game elements, but make sure they're a serious game designer that's actually working with the users to know what's going to work with them. Employ focused testing and iterative design. Broaden that definition of client to all of these people because they're all part of your client stakeholder group. And engineer employment of success. So at the end of these products, once your game exists, they don't just come. That's one of the big things we've learned as well. You have to actually pilot, you have to soft launch, you often have to push with a marketing campaign, you have to have support for other vendors or internal cost centers, you have to have a plan for that data you're producing, plan for deployment, plan for maintenance, plan for content maintenance and technology maintenance. That's all I have to share with you today. If you'd like to continue the conversation, there's my information. There's 15 minutes between breaks here, so I'm here for any questions, any comments.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
So the simulation that I have has been around for 12 years. It's gone through many, many iterations.
Mhm.
We're now going into a completely new generation of this. It's going 3D, looks much more like the MMOs that are out there, etc. However, the project has been running since 2014. It was meant to take 2 years. We are now on the 5th year, and we only have half the product. Now, for me, a lot of that is to blame with all the product rubbish that went on